Plato, born around 428 to 423 BC, was a key figure in ancient Greek philosophy during the classical period. He is recognized as one of the foundational thinkers in Western philosophy and was instrumental in developing the written dialogue and dialectic methods. His work influenced both theoretical and practical philosophy, and he established the Platonic Academy in Athens, a renowned institution where he taught ideas that later shaped Platonism. The early life of Plato remains somewhat mysterious due to the limited availability of reliable sources. However, scholars have managed to piece together some details about his upbringing and education. His birth name was Aristocles, but he later became known as Plato, a name that is believed to have originated from his broad shoulders and physique. His family had a long history of political influence and intellectual pursuits. His mother, Perictione, was related to the famous Athenian lawmaker Solon, which further connected Plato to a legacy of governance and philosophy. From an early age, Plato demonstrated a strong intellectual ability and an interest in philosophy. He received a well-rounded education in subjects such as music, poetry, grammar, gymnastics, and mathematics. One of his early influences was the philosopher Cratylus of Ephesus, a follower of Heraclitus, who introduced him to literature, rhetoric, and ethics. Plato excelled academically in the arts and even participated in wrestling competitions, including events at the Olympic and Nemean Games. Plato's childhood and teenage years unfolded during a period of political and social decline in Athens, following the golden age of Pericles. This era saw a rise in corruption, complacency, and greed, particularly as military tensions between the Delian League and the Peloponnesian forces intensified. His father, Aristotle, was involved in politics and hoped that Plato would follow in his footsteps. However, Plato had different aspirations and explored writing as an outlet, experimenting with poetry and drama. In 408 BCE, Plato wrote a tragedy and planned to present it at a theatre. On his way home, he encountered an older man who engaged him in a conversation that profoundly changed his life. This man was none other than Socrates, and that conversation marked a turning point in Plato's journey. Fascinated by Socrates' method of questioning assumptions and exposing deeper truths, Plato became his devoted student in his early 20s. Socrates' way of teaching, known as the Socratic method, encouraged critical thinking through dialogue and challenged conventional wisdom. This experience deeply influenced Plato's philosophical views. The execution of Socrates for allegedly corrupting the youth of Athens had a profound impact on Plato. Disillusioned by the injustice of the trial, he withdrew from public life and left Athens. He traveled to Egypt, Italy, and Sicily, where he encountered diverse cultures and philosophical traditions. These experiences broadened his understanding of different intellectual perspectives and deepened his studies in mathematics and astronomy. In 388 BCE, Plato returned to Athens and founded the Academy, an institution dedicated to higher learning and philosophical exploration. The Academy quickly became a leading center for intellectual discussion and one of the first institutions of higher education in Western history. It attracted scholars and philosophers from various backgrounds and fostered discussions on ethics, metaphysics, political philosophy, and epistemology. In addition to teaching, Plato wrote philosophical dialogues in which Socrates played the central role. These dialogues explored various topics, including justice, knowledge, reality, and governance, and served as both philosophical treatises and literary works that captured the intellectual debates of his time. Through these writings, Plato established himself as a foundational thinker whose ideas would shape the course of Western philosophy. During his time in Athens, Plato also formed connections with influential figures, including Aristotle, who became his most famous student. Their teacher-student relationship played a crucial role in shaping Aristotle's philosophical ideas, many of which built upon or challenged Plato's theories. This intellectual lineage ensured that Plato's influence extended far beyond his own lifetime, leaving a lasting impact on philosophy, politics, and education. To understand Plato's philosophy deeper, you must have a full understanding of his theory of forms. Plato's philosophy is deeply rooted in the concept of forms, or ideas, which he saw as the ultimate reality. According to Plato, these forms exist in a separate, unchanging realm and represent perfect, eternal ideals. The physical world that people experience through their senses is only a reflection or an imperfect copy of this higher reality. While everything in the material world is temporary and subject to change, the forms remain absolute and unaltered. Plato believed that physical objects are flawed representations of their perfect counterparts in the world of forms. Human perception is limited by subjective interpretations and individual experiences, making it impossible to grasp true reality through the senses alone. The forms, however, exist independently of perception and define the essential qualities of things. For example, there is an ideal form of beauty that embodies everything that makes something truly beautiful. While people or objects may appear beautiful, they only reflect this perfect concept to varying degrees and can never fully capture its true essence. Plato argued that humans have an innate awareness of these forms, because the soul existed in the world of forms before being born into a physical body. He believed that knowledge is not learned, but rather remembered through deep philosophical inquiry. This process of recalling higher truths is central to his idea of education, where individuals gradually move from illusion to understanding by contemplating the nature of reality. Plato viewed the forms as structured in a hierarchy, with the form of goodness at the very top. He considered this form to be the source of all truth and the guiding principle for morality, ethics, and wisdom. Just as the sun illuminates the physical world, the form of goodness sheds light on all other forms, making true knowledge possible. In his view, achieving an understanding of this ultimate reality was the highest goal of philosophy. This theory of forms played a major role in Plato's political philosophy, influencing his vision of an ideal society. He argued that just as reality has an underlying structure based on the forms, society should also be organized in a way that reflects this order. He believed that only those who had gained knowledge of the forms through rigorous philosophical training should be fit to govern. These individuals, known as philosopher kings, would rule with wisdom and justice, ensuring that society was aligned with higher ideals rather than being driven by material desires. Plato proposed a structured society divided into 3 classes, each corresponding to different abilities and roles. At the top were the rulers, or philosopher kings, who possessed the deepest understanding of truth and reality. Their role was to make wise and just decisions that would guide the state toward harmony and virtue. Beneath them were the guardians, also known as auxiliaries, who served as warriors and protectors of the state. They were trained not only in military skills, but also in philosophy and character development, to ensure that their leadership was guided by reason rather than brute force. The third and largest class consisted of the producers, including farmers, artisans, and merchants, who were responsible for providing goods and services. Though they did not engage in philosophical pursuits, their labor was essential for maintaining the well-being of the state. Plato's vision of a just society was one where each individual played the role best suited to their nature and abilities. He believed that disorder and injustice arose when people acted outside their designated roles or pursued self-interest over the common good. In his ideal society, the rulers governed based on wisdom, the guardians enforced order and security, and the producers ensured economic stability. Through this structured system, Plato aimed to create a state that mirrored the harmony and rational order of the forms, ensuring fairness and prosperity for all its members. Linking in with his theory of forms, there is his theory of knowledge. He examines how knowledge is acquired and what separates true understanding from mere opinion. A key idea in Plato's theory is recollection, also known as anamnesis. He believed that knowledge is not something people acquire from experience, but rather something they remember from a previous existence. Before being born into the physical world, the soul resided in the realm of forms, where it had direct knowledge of perfect and unchanging truths. Learning, in this view, is not discovering something new, but remembering something the soul already knew but had forgotten. For Plato, true knowledge, or episteme, is firm and certain. It is not based on sensory perception or opinion, which can be unreliable and inconsistent. Instead, genuine knowledge comes from rational thought and intellectual contemplation of eternal truths found in the realm of forms. Unlike sensory information, which is influenced by external conditions and can lead to errors, knowledge gained through reason is unchanging and absolute. Plato argued that while the senses provide information about the physical world, they can be misleading and only reveal part of reality. For example, things appear different based on perspective, distance, or light, making sensory perception inconsistent. True understanding comes from reasoning, which allows people to recognize the universal principles or forms that define all particular objects and experiences. Plato distinguished between two levels of reality. The visible world consists of everything that can be seen and experienced through the senses, including physical objects that are always changing and imperfect. Beyond this is the intelligible world, where the timeless and perfect forms exist. Every physical object is only an imperfect copy of its corresponding form. For example, a beautiful painting, a flower, or a person may all possess beauty, but they are only reflections of the perfect form of beauty itself, which never changes. According to Plato, true understanding requires deep intellectual effort rather than relying solely on what the senses reveal. He believed that philosophical inquiry should be based on dialectic reasoning, a process where individuals engage in discussions, ask questions, and challenge assumptions to reach higher levels of insight. This method of questioning and reasoning helps uncover deeper truths and brings people closer to true knowledge. Plato also developed a theory of morality, explored in his dialogues and developed in works like Republic and Phaedrus. It is centered on the concept of the soul. He believed that morality is not just about following external rules or societal norms, but is deeply connected to the very nature of the soul and its alignment with the ultimate good. To Plato, moral excellence comes from understanding and cultivating the soul in a way that leads to a just and virtuous life. Plato held that every human possesses an eternal soul that exists before birth and continues after death. He saw the soul as the core of a person's identity and believed it was made up of three distinct parts: reason, appetite, and spirit. Reason represents the rational and intellectual side, responsible for wisdom and guiding decisions based on knowledge and understanding. Appetite consists of desires, emotions, and physical needs, often driving people toward pleasure and material pursuits. Spirit is the part of the soul that seeks honor and recognition, fueling ambition and determination. Each of these parts serves a purpose, but for a person to live a moral life, they must exist in harmony with one another. Plato argued that true virtue is achieved when reason governs over appetite and spirit. This means that wisdom and knowledge must guide a person's choices, ensuring that desires and emotions do not lead them astray. Through reason, individuals can recognize higher truths, such as justice, truth, and beauty, which exist beyond the physical world. He believed that understanding these abstract ideals required deep philosophical inquiry, self-reflection, and contemplation. Education played a crucial role in shaping moral character, as it exposed individuals to philosophy and guided their souls toward what is truly good. Beyond individual morality, Plato also emphasized the importance of societal harmony. He believed that a just society should function in a way that reflects the balance within the soul. In his vision of an ideal state, society would be governed by philosopher kings, leaders who have gained profound knowledge of the truth and are capable of ruling with wisdom and justice. Each individual would play a role based on their natural abilities and talents, ensuring that society functions efficiently and fairly. Plato's moral theory laid the foundation for future ethical thought in Western philosophy. His ideas about reason, self-reflection, and education as essential components of both personal and societal virtue continue to inspire discussions on ethics. His work challenges people to think deeply about the nature of morality and the pursuit of a just and meaningful life. One of Plato's most famous and influential ideas is the allegory of the cave, found in the Republic. This story explains the difference between appearance and reality, and explores what it means to move from ignorance to knowledge. The allegory describes prisoners who have been chained inside a dark cave since birth, facing a wall. Behind them, a fire burns, casting shadows on the wall as unseen figures move objects in front of the fire. Since the prisoners only see these shadows, they believe them to be reality. This represents how people often accept their limited perceptions as the truth without questioning them. The cave symbolizes ignorance, and the chains represent the constraints that prevent people from seeking deeper understanding. Without critical thinking or philosophy, people remain trapped in their familiar but limited view of the world. The story follows one prisoner who breaks free and leaves the cave. At first, the bright light outside blinds and confuses him, but as his eyes adjust, he sees the world as it truly is. This difficult journey represents the philosopher's struggle to seek wisdom and uncover deeper truths. The sunlight in the story symbolizes knowledge and Plato's theory of forms, the idea that beyond our everyday experiences lies a higher reality of perfect, unchanging ideas. When the freed prisoner returns to the cave to share what he has learned, the others reject and ridicule him. They are unwilling to question what they have always known. This illustrates how people often resist new ideas, even if those ideas bring them closer to the truth. The allegory highlights the challenges that philosophers face when trying to educate society. At its core, Plato's allegory of the cave explores the difference between perception and reality, the nature of true knowledge, and the role of philosophers in guiding others toward enlightenment. It suggests that what we see and experience in the physical world is only a shadow of a deeper reality. According to Plato's theory of forms, the true essence of things exists beyond what we can perceive with our senses, and everything in the material world is an imperfect reflection of these perfect forms. The journey out of the cave represents the soul's path to understanding these forms, and Plato suggests that those who achieve this understanding have a responsibility to help others. However, he also acknowledges that people may resist or reject those who try to challenge their beliefs. In this way, Plato presents philosophers as society's guides, leading people from ignorance to knowledge, even when their efforts are met with skepticism or hostility. This allegory remains one of Plato's most powerful ideas, influencing not only philosophy, but also discussions on education, truth, and leadership. Plato's allegory of the cave is a powerful metaphor that explores human perception, knowledge, and leadership. It not only reveals how individuals come to understand reality, but also carries profound implications for politics and society, particularly in the way leaders are chosen and how governments function. The allegory suggests that many societies fail to recognize what is truly valuable, often following leaders who mistake illusions for reality, just like the prisoners in the cave who believe shadows are real objects. Plato argues that this is common in political systems that prioritize power, wealth, and persuasion over wisdom, truth, and justice. He believed that societies should be led by those who have gained genuine knowledge, as only they can make just and informed decisions. To illustrate this, he introduces the idea of the philosopher king, an enlightened leader who has escaped the cave and experienced the true nature of reality. Because this ruler understands the deeper truths of existence, they are best suited to govern. In the Republic, Plato details an extensive educational system to prepare future rulers, emphasizing philosophy, ethics, mathematics, and rigorous intellectual training. He believed that only those who had undergone this process of enlightenment should be entrusted with leadership. Beyond theory, Plato's allegory serves as a critique of political systems, particularly Athenian democracy, which he viewed as flawed. He believed that in democratic societies, policies were determined by individuals who were skilled at persuasion rather than those with true wisdom. He was concerned that citizens often made decisions based on emotions and superficial arguments rather than careful thought and rational judgment. This, in his view, led to instability and poor governance. The allegory also forces readers to rethink how leaders should be chosen. Should rulers be appointed based on wealth, popularity, or inherited status? Or should leadership be entrusted to those who truly understand justice and the greater good? Plato suggests that a just society should be governed by individuals who seek truth and wisdom rather than personal gain, even if their decisions are sometimes unpopular. Beyond its political message, the cave allegory also serves as a metaphor for personal growth and education. Plato presents knowledge as more than just accumulating facts. It is a deep transformation that requires individuals to challenge their assumptions and seek higher understanding. At the beginning of the journey, people are like prisoners in the cave, trapped by their limited experiences and beliefs. They only see shadows on the wall, which represent misconceptions, superficial knowledge, or half-truths. Since they have never known anything different, they accept this reality without question. However, when one prisoner is freed and begins to move toward the outside world, he experiences confusion and discomfort. The bright light of the fire hurts his eyes, just as new and unfamiliar ideas can be difficult to accept at first. This stage represents the initial struggle of questioning old beliefs and stepping outside of one's comfort zone. As the prisoner continues his journey, he eventually reaches the outside world, where he sees the sun for the first time. At first, the brightness overwhelms him, but as he adjusts, he realizes the world is much larger and more complex than he previously thought. This process symbolizes the transition from ignorance to true understanding. The sun represents ultimate truth and knowledge, which can only be grasped through deep reasoning and intellectual exploration. However, enlightenment comes with a challenge. When the freed prisoner returns to the cave to share his newfound knowledge, the other prisoners refuse to believe him. They ridicule and reject him, preferring the familiarity of their limited world over the difficult process of questioning and learning. This part of the allegory highlights how difficult it is to change people's deeply held beliefs, and how those who seek to share wisdom may be met with resistance or hostility. At the heart of Plato's philosophy is the idea that there are two levels of reality. The world of appearances is what we perceive through our senses. It is constantly changing, unreliable, and deceptive, represented by the shadows on the cave wall. The world of forms exists beyond sensory perception. This is a higher, unchanging reality where true knowledge resides. In this realm, there are perfect, eternal versions of concepts such as justice, beauty, and goodness, which physical objects can only imitate. According to Plato, most people are trapped in the world of appearances, believing only what they can see and touch. True philosophers, however, seek to understand the forms, using reason rather than relying on their senses. The freed prisoner's journey out of the cave represents the soul's progression from illusion to truth, from reliance on sensory perception to intellectual enlightenment. Plato argues that knowledge gained through the senses is incomplete. For example, if we see a beautiful object, we recognize its beauty, but this beauty is only a reflection of the perfect form of beauty that exists beyond the physical world. Similarly, acts of justice in our world are imperfect reflections of the pure form of justice. To truly understand these concepts, one must move beyond surface-level perception and engage in philosophical reasoning. Plato also raises important questions about the responsibilities of those who achieve enlightenment. If someone discovers the truth, should they return to help others, even if they are mocked and resisted? He suggests that philosophers have a duty to guide society, even when people are reluctant to listen. The philosopher king embodies this idea. Having seen the truth, they are responsible for leading others out of ignorance. However, this is not an easy task, as many people prefer to stay in their familiar ways of thinking rather than challenge their beliefs. This part of the allegory reflects how difficult it is to introduce new ideas, as those who resist change often cling to what they already know. Plato's view of leadership is different from modern democracy, where leaders are chosen by popular vote. Instead, he argues that rulers should be those who have dedicated their lives to seeking wisdom, understanding justice, and acting for the greater good. The philosopher king is not interested in power for personal gain, but in guiding society toward truth and fairness. Ultimately, Plato's allegory of the cave is more than just a story. It is a challenge to think critically about what we accept as truth. It forces us to ask whether we are seeing the world as it really is, or if we are only looking at shadows. It makes us question whether we are open to challenging our beliefs, or if we resist change out of fear. It also asks whether leadership should be based on popularity and power, or on wisdom and deep understanding. Plato's message is timeless, encouraging us to go beyond surface-level appearances and seek deeper knowledge. Whether applied to politics, education, or personal growth, the cave allegory reminds us that true understanding requires effort, courage, and a willingness to step into the light, no matter how uncomfortable it may be. Plato never directly speaks in his own voice in his dialogues. Instead, he presents ideas through characters, with Socrates appearing in all of them, except one. Philosopher Leo Strauss points out that Socrates' reputation for irony makes it unclear whether the Socrates in Plato's works expresses Plato's true beliefs. Other sources, such as Xenophon's Memorabilia and Aristophanes' Play the Clouds, depict Socrates differently from how Plato does. Aristotle also noted a difference between Socrates and Plato's ideas about forms. According to Aristotle, Socrates believed forms could be understood by studying the natural world, while Plato saw them as existing beyond human experience. Scholars continue to debate the exact relationship between Plato and Socrates, as their ideas are not always easy to separate. Plato's philosophy has had a lasting influence, but it has also faced many criticisms throughout history. Some critics argue that his theory of forms is too abstract and disconnected from reality. Plato believed in a separate realm of perfect, unchanging ideals that exist beyond the physical world. But critics claim this idea ignores the importance of real-world experience and the complexity of the natural world. They argue that focusing on an invisible realm of forms diminishes the value of empirical observation and scientific discovery. Another major criticism is that Plato's vision of an ideal society, as described in the Republic, is unrealistic and impractical. His idea of philosopher kings ruling with absolute wisdom has been criticized as idealistic and unlikely to work in practice. Some also argue that it promotes an authoritarian system where power is concentrated in the hands of a few, raising concerns about potential oppression. The rigid structure of Plato's ideal society, where individuals are assigned roles based on their abilities, has also been seen as limiting personal freedom and social mobility. Plato's theory of knowledge has also been questioned, particularly his idea that learning is simply a process of recollecting the forms that the soul knew before birth. Critics argue that this perspective downplays the role of experience and sensory perception in gaining knowledge. Modern psychology and neuroscience suggest that knowledge is developed through learning and interaction with the world, rather than being something people are born remembering. Another point of debate is whether Plato accurately represents the ideas of Socrates in his writings. Since Socrates left no written works, everything known about his philosophy comes from Plato's dialogues. Some scholars believe that Plato used Socrates as a character to present his own ideas, making it difficult to separate Socrates' real beliefs from Plato's philosophical developments. This has led to ongoing discussions about where Socrates' teachings end and where Plato's own thinking begins. In addition to these philosophical concerns, Plato has been criticized for his views on gender roles, knowledge, and social hierarchy. Some argue that his emphasis on an intellectual elite creates an exclusionary system that values certain groups over others. Despite these critiques, his ideas remain central to philosophical discussion. Many of his theories continue to influence contemporary debates in ethics, politics, metaphysics, and education, proving that his work is still relevant and widely studied today. Accounts of Plato's death vary. One story, based on a fragmented manuscript, claims he died peacefully in bed while a young Thracian girl played the flute for him. Another tradition, recorded by the historian Hermippus and cited by Diogenes Laertius, suggests he passed away at a wedding feast. The Christian writer Tertullian stated that Plato simply died in his sleep. Philodemus recorded that he was buried in the garden of his academy in Athens, near a shrine dedicated to the Muses. In 2024, a deciphered scroll from Herculaneum supported some of these accounts, stating that before his death, Plato retained enough clarity to criticize a musician's poor sense of rhythm, and was ultimately laid to rest in his designated garden at the academy. Plato's influence extended beyond ancient Greece, shaping both Christian and Islamic philosophy through Neoplatonism. The modern philosopher Alfred North Whitehead once remarked that the European philosophical tradition could be seen as a series of footnotes to Plato. Pythagoras. Pythagoras of Samos was born around 570 BCE to Menesarchus, a gem engraver, and Pythias, who came from a wealthy and influential family. According to historical accounts, while Pythias was pregnant, the couple traveled to Delphi to consult the oracle, who prophesied that their child would grow into a man of extraordinary wisdom and beauty, destined to benefit humanity. From an early age, Pythagoras was exposed to advanced learning and studied under some of the most respected pre-Socratic philosophers. He is said to have been taught by Pherecydes of Syros, Anaximander, and two of the seven sages, Bias of Priene and Thales of Miletus. Thales, in particular, is believed to have encouraged him to travel to Egypt for further education. Some traditions also claim that Pythagoras was influenced by Orphic teachings and was one of the first to be initiated into the Orphic mysteries, which emphasize the immortality of the soul and spiritual purification. During his early adulthood, Pythagoras traveled extensively, seeking knowledge beyond Greece. He is said to have visited Babylonia, Phoenicia, and Egypt, though the accounts of his time in Babylonia and Phoenicia remain disputed. However, there is general agreement that he traveled to Egypt, where he studied with Egyptian priests in Thebes. He is believed to have been the only foreigner known to have participated in their religious rites. His time in Egypt exposed him to advanced ideas in geometry, mathematics, and the concept of metempsychosis, the belief in the transmigration of the soul. Pythagoras's travels were not just for academic study, but also for spiritual enlightenment. He was fascinated by religious rituals and underwent initiation into the Eleusinian mysteries. Some accounts suggest that he studied with Zoroastrian magi priests and learned moral philosophy from the Delphic priestess Themistoclea. When he eventually returned to Samos, he established a school known as the Semicircle, which attracted some of the brightest minds of ancient Greece. It was within this intellectual community that many of the core ideas of Pythagoreanism likely developed. Despite its academic significance, the semicircle did not serve as the foundation for the Pythagorean way of life, nor did it resemble the cult-like following that Pythagoras later established. In 530 BCE, he left Samos for reasons that remain debated. Some believe he opposed the rule of Polycrates, who had taken control of Samos 5 years earlier. Others suggest that he left because he was overwhelmed by his growing public duties and teaching responsibilities. At the age of 60, he moved to the Greek colony of Croton in southern Italy, where he quickly gained a large following due to his charisma and public speaking skills. With the help of his supporters, he established the first Pythagorean commune, a structured society dedicated to philosophical study, mathematics, and a strict moral code. For years, the Pythagorean commune thrived under Pythagoras's leadership, attracting hundreds of devoted followers. However, as the group's influence grew, it also made powerful enemies. In 510 BCE, Pythagoras and his followers played a key role in helping Croton defeat its neighboring city, Sybaris, in a decisive battle. After the victory, the people of Croton sought to introduce a democratic constitution, but Pythagoras used his influence to prevent this from happening. His rejection of democratic rule angered many, and opposition against him intensified. The Pythagoreans regularly held meetings in the home of the Olympic athlete Milo, one of their supporters. During one of these gatherings, a group of pro-democratic rebels set Milo's house on fire in an attempt to eliminate Pythagoras and his followers in a single act of revenge. What happened next remains uncertain, as historical accounts differ. Some claim that Pythagoras was present during the fire and either died in the flames or managed to escape at the cost of many of his followers. Other sources suggest that after escaping the attack, he and his remaining followers fled to Metapontum, where they sought refuge in the Temple of the Muses. However, without food or water, Pythagoras and his followers reportedly died 40 days later. There are also stories that suggest Pythagoras, overwhelmed by grief after the loss of so many followers, took his own life. Later Pythagorean accounts offer a more legendary version of his death, claiming that he almost escaped but came across a field of fava beans. Because Pythagoreans considered beans sacred, he refused to cross the field and was quickly caught and executed. Despite his tragic end, Pythagoras's influence endured, shaping the development of mathematics, philosophy, and religious thought for centuries. His teachings, particularly in mathematics and the idea that numbers govern the universe, laid the foundation for later scientific discoveries and philosophical traditions. Many discoveries in mathematics, music, and astronomy have been credited to Pythagoras, but historians debate whether he actually contributed to these fields. The most famous theorem associated with his name, the Pythagorean theorem, was known in Babylonia and ancient India centuries before his birth. It is possible that he encountered it during his travels and introduced it to the Greek world, but there is no direct evidence proving he was the first to develop it. Later followers of Pythagoras claimed that he was the first to identify the 5 regular solids and that he discovered the theory of proportions, as well as the mathematical principles behind musical intervals and octaves. Historians question how much of this can truly be attributed to Pythagoras himself, and how much was credited to him by later Pythagoreans seeking to elevate his status. It is likely that while Pythagoras contributed to these ideas, many of the discoveries linked to him were formalized and expanded upon by his followers. He may have laid the groundwork for understanding the relationship between mathematics and music, but the extent of his direct involvement remains uncertain. Pythagoreans viewed him not just as a philosopher, but as a nearly divine figure, a common characteristic in religious sects centered around charismatic leaders. Stories about him included claims that he could predict the future, that he had a golden thigh, and that a river once spoke to him. Some even said he traveled to the underworld and returned with precise details of what people had been doing during his absence. One of the most extraordinary legends surrounding Pythagoras was his supposed ability to remember all his past lives. According to his followers, he had lived multiple times before being born as Pythagoras. His previous identities included Ethalides, the son of Hermes, who was granted the ability to remember everything in life and death. He was later reborn as Euphorbus, a warrior in the Trojan War, then as Hermotimus, followed by Pyrrhus, a fisherman from Delos, and finally as Pythagoras. These stories supported his belief in metempsychosis, the idea that souls are reborn into new bodies after death. His followers used these claims to establish him as an ancient and divine figure, suggesting that his knowledge predated even Homer and Hesiod. It is unlikely that Pythagoras himself spread these myths. More likely, his later followers exaggerated or invented these stories to solidify his authority in both philosophical and religious matters. While his influence on mathematics and science remains debated, his impact on mysticism and the development of religious philosophy is undeniable. Pythagoreanism was based on the belief that numbers were the foundation of the universe, and that everything in existence could be understood through numerical relationships. Pythagoras believed that numbers held the key to unlocking the mysteries of the cosmos, and that mathematical patterns governed the structure of reality. Unlike other Greek mathematicians of his time, who expressed numbers through words, the Pythagoreans developed a visual approach by arranging pebbles into triangular patterns. This method allowed them to explore the connections between numbers, geometry, and proportions in a way that had never been done before. Pythagoras only recognized natural numbers, meaning positive whole numbers, as the concept of zero had not yet been introduced to Greece from India. Negative numbers were considered nonsensical and even heretical. One of his students, Hippias, is said to have discovered irrational numbers, a revelation that reportedly led Pythagoras to take extreme measures to suppress it, even going so far as to have Hippias killed to protect the integrity of his mathematical beliefs. The Pythagoreans believed that numbers had not only mathematical significance, but also spiritual and mystical qualities. They assigned deeper meanings to certain numbers, seeing them as symbols of cosmic and moral principles. The number 1 represented divine intellect, unity, and the origin of all things, while 2 symbolized thought and matter. They placed great importance on the number 3, associating it with the god Apollo, and viewing it as the sum of reality, encompassing the beginning, middle, and end of all things. 3 also carried moral significance, representing wisdom, determination, and good fortune. The number 4 was linked to justice, as well as the 4 seasons and elements of nature. 6 was connected to creation, and 7 was seen as a symbol of opportunity, corresponding to the 7 known planets and the 7 strings on the lyre. For the Pythagoreans, the number 10 was considered the most perfect number, representing completeness and balance. They honored this belief by gathering in groups of no more than 10 members. Pythagoras taught that 10 contained the essence of all numbers and was represented by the tetrad, a triangular formation of 4 rows that added up to 10. This shape was considered sacred and held the same level of spiritual importance as the Holy Cross in Christianity or the Star of David in Judaism. All Pythagorean oaths and vows were sworn by the tetrad. Numbers were also associated with human qualities and relationships. The number 3 was considered masculine, while 2 was seen as feminine. The number 5 symbolized marriage, as it was the sum of 2 and 3, representing the union of man and woman. For the Pythagoreans, numbers were more than just mathematical tools. They were the fundamental building blocks of the universe, shaping both the physical world and human existence. The Pythagoreans believed that harmony was the balance of opposites and saw it as a fundamental principle of the universe. They categorized opposites into 2 main groups, the limited and the unlimited, which they represented through odd and even numbers. Even numbers were considered unlimited because they could be divided infinitely while always producing whole numbers, whereas odd numbers were seen as limited since their division eventually led to indivisible units. The number 1 was an exception, regarded as both even and odd due to its unique mathematical properties. These numerical classifications extended beyond mathematics into broader concepts such as gender, direction, and nature. Masculinity was associated with odd numbers, while femininity was linked to even numbers. Other dualities, such as right and left or light and dark, were also categorized according to this numerical system. Music held deep significance for the Pythagoreans, who believed that it had the power to heal the soul. Pythagoras discovered that musical notes followed mathematical relationships and could be translated into numerical intervals, ratios, and octaves. This system, later known as Pythagorean tuning, laid the foundation for the study of musical harmony. Pythagoreans also developed the concept of the harmony of the spheres, a theory that suggested celestial bodies moved in a way that produced a harmonic sound. They believed that the stars and planets moved according to precise mathematical proportions, creating a cosmic music that was inaudible to humans. This belief led them to conclude that the structure of the universe was governed by the same numerical principles found in music. Rejecting the idea that Earth was the center of the cosmos, they proposed that all celestial bodies orbited around a central fire, an idea that challenged the traditional geocentric model of the universe. A core belief of Pythagoreanism was metempsychosis, the idea that the soul is reborn in different forms after death. According to this belief, reincarnation was an eternal law of the universe, and every living being was part of this ongoing cycle. Unlike other traditions that linked reincarnation to moral consequences, the Pythagoreans did not believe that a person's actions in life determined their future form. Even the most virtuous person could be reborn as an animal, such as a dog or a mouse, without any connection to their previous deeds. However, the cycle of reincarnation was not inescapable. The Pythagoreans believed that through strict adherence to their way of life, including its rituals, customs, and prohibitions, the soul could be purified and freed from this cycle forever. A purified soul would then ascend to join the gods and Pythagoras in the afterlife. Their belief in reincarnation led them to abstain from eating meat, fish, and beans, and they became early advocates for the humane treatment of animals in ancient Greece. Since they believed that the souls of humans and animals were interchangeable, they saw all living creatures as deserving of kindness and protection. To them, the only difference between humans and animals was the ability to reason, and they felt responsible for safeguarding less rational beings. They avoided causing harm to animals unless it was absolutely necessary for survival, as they believed that inflicting pain diminished their moral purity. The Pythagoreans also had a peculiar avoidance of fava beans. Some claimed that Pythagoras believed beans contained the souls of the dead, while others suggested that he warned against them because they caused gas, which symbolically took away the breath of life. Historians question the accuracy of these claims, speculating that they may have been invented to ridicule or discredit the Pythagorean movement. Despite these doubts, the avoidance of beans became one of the most well-known and mysterious aspects of Pythagorean tradition. Plato described Pythagoras as someone who was remembered not just for his ideas, but for creating a new way of life. The Pythagoreans followed a strict, communal, and disciplined lifestyle that emphasized equality among its members. They believed in sharing everything and lived by the maxim, all things in common among friends. Anyone who wished to join had to give up all personal possessions, which became shared property within the group. Before becoming full members, initiates had to complete a 5-year trial period that included a vow of silence. During this time, they were not allowed to meet Pythagoras or any later leaders. If someone failed to complete the initiation, their possessions were returned with interest. While it is uncertain whether all Pythagoreans lived together in a single commune or maintained separate homes, they supported each other financially and emotionally, helping members in times of need. Their community was notable for its egalitarian approach, allowing women to study and participate equally. Some of the earliest surviving philosophical works by female philosophers come from the Pythagorean tradition. Theano of Croton, who is believed to have been the wife of Pythagoras, is thought to have led the group after his death. Other prominent female Pythagorean philosophers included Perictione I, Perictione II, Esara of Lucania, and Phintis of Sparta. Perictione I, who lived around the same time as Plato, wrote about self-control and wisdom, particularly as they applied to women. To achieve purity of the soul, the Pythagoreans followed a set of teachings attributed to Pythagoras, which were passed down orally as a collection of sayings known as symbola, or acousmata. These teachings dictated many aspects of daily life, including rules that seemed arbitrary, such as avoiding stepping over a yoke, not stirring a fire with a knife, and never picking up food that had fallen from the table. They were also prohibited from wearing wool and were required to put on their right sandal before their left. Other rules were more structured and established a daily routine. Every morning, Pythagoreans took a solitary walk before eating a simple breakfast of bread and honey. After working during the day, they would take another walk, this time in small groups, before gathering for a communal dinner in groups of 10. The evening meal always began with a ritual offering to the gods and had to be finished before sunset. After dinner, members discussed philosophy and moral virtue before retiring for the night. Silence was required after lights out, reinforcing their disciplined lifestyle. Their daily practices reflected their belief in order, self-control, and a structured way of life that aimed to align them with higher truths. After Pythagoras' death, disagreements over his teachings and way of life led to a division within the Pythagorean community, creating two distinct philosophical traditions. One group, known as the listeners, focused on the religious, mystical, and ritualistic aspects of Pythagoras' teachings. They viewed his words as sacred and unchangeable, resisting any attempts to reinterpret or expand upon them. Their main focus was on following the Pythagorean way of life, adhering to its strict prohibitions and purification rituals in the hope of achieving a purified soul and a place in the afterlife. They rejected advancements in mathematics and instead concentrated on moral philosophy, refining ideas about justice, harmony, and ethical behavior. The other group, called the learners, took a different approach by emphasizing the development of mathematical and scientific principles. While they still acknowledged the religious foundations of Pythagoreanism, they believed that Pythagoras' true mission was to explore the universe through numbers and mathematical relationships. These philosophers expanded on Pythagoras' ideas, making significant contributions to mathematics, geometry, musical theory, and proportions. They also advanced the theory of universal harmony, proposing that celestial bodies moved in mathematical proportions, producing an inaudible cosmic music as they orbited around a central fire. The divide between these two groups was not just philosophical, but also ideological. While the learners recognized the listeners as fellow Pythagoreans, the listeners did not extend the same acknowledgement. To outsiders, both were often seen as part of the same tradition, despite their differences. Over time, these groups evolved separately. By the 4th century BCE, the listeners had become wandering philosophers and were eventually merged or replaced by the Cynic school of thought. Around the same time, the learners became integrated into the Platonic school of philosophy. Although the original Pythagorean movement faded, its ideas resurfaced in the 1st century BCE with the rise of Neo-Pythagoreanism, a revival of Pythagorean thought that reinterpreted its teachings in new ways. For at least 2 centuries after Pythagoras' death, the Pythagorean way of life and the worship of Pythagoras continued in Italy. It is unclear exactly what happened to the religious community he founded, but it likely influenced or merged with other mystery cults, such as Orphism and the Bacchic mysteries. While the Pythagorean religious movement did not endure in its original form, its philosophical and mathematical contributions had a lasting impact on Western thought. The ideas that originated with Pythagoras shaped the development of philosophy, mathematics, and science for centuries, influencing scholars and thinkers long after the original community had disappeared. Epicurus, born in 341 BCE, was an ancient Greek philosopher best known for founding Epicureanism, a philosophy that emphasized friendship, simple pleasures, and a peaceful life free from unnecessary desires and fears. He established his own school in Athens, which remained active for centuries, lasting until the 4th century CE. Although Epicurus was a prolific writer, with estimates suggesting he wrote over 300 works, only a small portion of his writings have survived. Most of what is known about his philosophy comes from fragments of his letters and the writings of his followers and contemporaries who recorded and expanded upon his teachings. At the core of Epicureanism was the belief that happiness was achieved by living a tranquil life, free from pain and anxiety. He encouraged his followers to seek pleasure in moderation, focusing on intellectual fulfillment and strong friendships rather than material wealth or indulgence. He believed that the best way to practice philosophy was within a close-knit community where people could support and learn from one another. His views on family, marriage, and parenting were more complex, and his writings do not provide clear-cut answers on these topics. Epicurus was born on the island of Samos, the same island where Pythagoras was born centuries earlier. His parents, Neocles and Cheristrate, were Athenian settlers sent to Samos as part of a military colonization effort. His father worked as a schoolteacher, while his mother likely managed their household. Epicurus himself claimed that his interest in philosophy began at the age of 14, when one of his teachers was unable to explain the concept of chaos in the writings of the Greek poet Hesiod. Seeking deeper understanding, he pursued further studies in the Ionian city of Teos, where he spent 3 years learning from the philosopher Nausiphanes, a follower of Democritus. Since Democritus was one of the earliest proponents of atomic theory, it is likely that Epicurus was first introduced to these ideas during his time in Teos. At the age of 18, he traveled to Athens to complete the 2 years of military training required for Athenian citizenship. Afterward, he rejoined his parents in Colophon, an Ionian city where they had relocated after being exiled when Athens lost control of Samos to Macedonia following the Lamian War. For the next 10 years, there is little information about Epicurus's activities, with only a single surviving letter to his mother providing a glimpse into this period of his life. In 306 BCE, Epicurus returned to Athens with a group of followers and established his own philosophical school, known as the Garden. At the time, the leading schools of philosophy in Athens were Plato's Academy and Aristotle's Lyceum, both of which attracted the most talented thinkers and placed a strong emphasis on political engagement and public affairs. To stand out, Epicurus took a different approach, focusing on a more personal and communal form of philosophical practice. Unlike the other schools, Epicurus discouraged his followers from engaging in politics, believing that involvement in public life led to unnecessary stress and distraction from the pursuit of tranquility. His school was also unique because it welcomed women and enslaved individuals, an uncommon practice in Greek philosophical circles. Rather than seeking wealth or luxury, members of the Garden lived modestly, drinking only water and eating simple meals such as barley bread. Epicurus promoted an inexpensive lifestyle, believing that true happiness came from appreciating the basic necessities of life rather than chasing extravagant pleasures. Unlike some other philosophical communities, there was no shared property among his followers, and while personal relationships did form between disciples, there is no reliable evidence suggesting that anything improper took place within the community. Epicurus died at the age of 72 from complications related to prostatitis, having successfully established a philosophical tradition that rivaled the other major schools in Athens. In his will, he ensured that his school would continue by leaving the Garden, along with its property and funds, in the hands of trusted followers. He also set aside money to honor his deceased parents and arranged for the marriage of the daughter of his close follower, Metrodorus, to an Athenian philosopher. His teachings left a lasting impact, shaping philosophical discussions for centuries and offering an alternative path to happiness through simplicity, friendship, and intellectual reflection. Epicurus placed great importance on friendship and social bonds over politics and public affairs because he believed they were essential for a peaceful and fulfilling life. Some scholars suggest that insights into this perspective can be found in the writings of his follower, Lucretius, particularly in On the Nature of Things. Since Lucretius was largely restating Epicurus's original ideas from his own work on nature, this provides a useful starting point for understanding Epicurean thought. Epicurus believed that the earliest humans lived in isolation without any structured societies or stable relationships. They reproduced randomly and had no organized way of cooperating or protecting each other, making their chances of long-term survival uncertain. However, he argued that the formation of families played a crucial role in changing this. As humans began to form stronger emotional connections, they became more protective of one another. The bonds between parents and children, as well as between partners, encouraged cooperation and made survival more likely. Over time, people began to marry and plan their families rather than reproducing at random. These family units created a foundation for larger social structures. Through cooperation, early humans learned to defend themselves from dangers such as wild animals and natural disasters. This sense of mutual protection led to the formation of small communities, which eventually grew into larger societies. As people developed names for one another and their surroundings, they strengthened their ability to communicate, organize, and build cities, nations, and states. These social bonds allowed human civilization to expand and thrive. Epicurus viewed friendship as a natural extension of this evolutionary process. Just as early families helped humans transition from solitary survival to cooperative living, friendships created emotional security and strengthened social ties. He believed that rather than engaging in politics, which often led to stress and conflict, people should focus on building personal relationships that provided comfort and stability. In his view, the true key to happiness was surrounding oneself with trustworthy friends and living a simple life within a supportive community. Through these social bonds, people could achieve a sense of peace, protection, and long-term fulfillment. Marriage and philosophy had a complicated relationship in ancient Greece and Rome. Socrates was famously married to Xanthippe, who was known for her strong temper, and they had 3 sons together. Philosophers held different views on marriage, with some, like Plato, reportedly supporting the idea of shared wives, while others rejected marriage altogether. During Epicurus's time, marriage was not based on romantic love, but was primarily linked to raising children. This was common in ancient Greece, where philosophers often distinguished between mistresses for pleasure and wives for producing offspring. The idea of marriage as a practical arrangement rather than an emotional bond was widely accepted. Some scholars believe Epicurus was generally opposed to marriage. There has been ongoing debate about the translation of a passage from Diogenes Laertius's biography of Epicurus, which states that a wise person will both marry and rear children. However, the next sentence seems to contradict this, suggesting that sages should only marry under exceptional circumstances. While Diogenes is often a key source for understanding the lives of philosophers, other Epicurean writings also suggest that Epicurus did not see marriage as essential to a good life. The philosopher Philodemus of Gadara, an Epicurean thinker, expressed skepticism about marriage. In his writings, he argued that poetry was a better form of entertainment at weddings than music, and questioned whether marriage could even be considered beneficial. He also pointed to the ancient poet Hesiod, who had doubts about marriage, using this to support his own critical view. However, not all Epicureans dismissed marriage. Lucretius, one of Epicurus's most devoted followers, presented a different perspective. He emphasized that children played a crucial role in the formation of society, helping humans develop cooperation and civilization. In On the Nature of Things, Epicurus is not portrayed as being against parenthood, as long as people approached it with realistic expectations. He believed that deciding whether to have children should be based on an honest understanding of one's own desires and willingness to take on the responsibility. Despite these debates, Epicurus himself never married, which may suggest that he followed his own philosophy on the matter. Since most of his writings have been lost, it is difficult to determine his exact views on traditional marriage. Scholars continue to disagree on whether he fully opposed it or simply advised against it under most circumstances. The question remains open, leaving room for different interpretations of his philosophy on family life. Many philosophers before and after Epicurus have focused on defining concepts like justice and the nature of goodness. However, Epicurus was more concerned with the suffering and fear he observed in the world around him. Instead of abstract debates, he dedicated himself to understanding what truly makes people happy. His approach was deeply practical and human-centered, driven by the desire to find a solution to human misery. This led him to examine the relationship between pleasure and pain, recognizing that simply increasing pleasurable experiences was not the answer. Indulging in pleasure for its own sake often led to negative consequences, making people less happy in the long run rather than more. Epicurus argued that pleasure itself was not inherently bad, but some pleasures came with consequences that outweighed their benefits. Drinking wine, for example, could be enjoyable in moderation, but excessive drinking led to painful hangovers and long-term health problems. Eating rich and delicious food might provide momentary delight, but overindulgence could result in discomfort and poor health. He believed that true happiness did not come from chasing pleasure, but from eliminating unnecessary pain and anxiety. His goal was to achieve a state of tranquility, where life was free from unnecessary worries. Contrary to what some critics claimed, his philosophy was not about self-indulgence or rejecting moral responsibility. Instead, it emphasized simple and meaningful pleasures that contributed to long-term well-being. Ironically, by focusing on these simple joys, people would naturally become more virtuous and moral without even trying. Epicurus believed that one of the greatest sources of stress was work. Many people spent their lives working in unfulfilling jobs, often dealing with difficult bosses or co-workers. The pressure to climb the social and financial ladder added even more anxiety, causing people to lose sight of what truly mattered. The temporary pleasure of earning money did not outweigh the daily misery that came with work that felt meaningless or exhausting. His solution was twofold. First, he encouraged people to stop working for others, and instead find ways to support themselves through meaningful work, either alone or with close friends. Second, he believed in self-sufficiency, reducing the need for external income by minimizing material desires. Epicurus and his followers put these ideas into practice by tending a communal garden, selling what they grew for income while also feeding themselves. This simple lifestyle freed them from the stress of financial dependence and allowed them to focus on what truly brought happiness. Another major source of anxiety Epicurus identified was the fear of not having enough money. Athens, during his time, was a wealthy city filled with extravagant goods, from exotic foods to luxurious fabrics and perfumes. However, Epicurus observed that wealth did not necessarily lead to happiness. Much like today, people constantly compared themselves to others, believing they needed more to be satisfied. This endless pursuit of material success created a cycle of anxiety, where people always felt they lacked something. Epicurus rejected the idea that wealth was necessary for happiness. Instead, he and his followers chose to live simply, escaping the pressures of materialism. By focusing on having just enough rather than constantly chasing more, they freed themselves from financial stress. Their self-sufficient lifestyle meant they had everything they needed without the constant pressure to accumulate wealth. Epicurus himself lived with very few possessions, reportedly owning only 2 cloaks, demonstrating his commitment to a life of simplicity over luxury. His philosophy was not about deprivation, but about recognizing that true happiness came from appreciating what was necessary rather than always wanting more. Before his death, Epicurus ensured that all his personal and practical affairs were in order. His last will and testament provide insight into his deep concern for his friends and followers at the garden. Through his will, he set an example for his disciples, emphasizing the importance of using such legal arrangements to protect and care for loved ones. His provisions for the daughter of his deceased follower, Metrodorus, demonstrate his commitment to the well-being of the surviving relatives of those who had been part of his philosophical community. A notable aspect of his will is the repeated instruction that his provisions should only be honored as long as Metrodorus's daughter behaved properly. Some scholars interpret this as evidence of Epicurus's focus on maintaining social harmony, particularly within the Epicurean community he left behind. By including conditions in his will, he may have been reinforcing the values and ethical expectations that were central to his philosophy, ensuring that his legacy would continue to be upheld according to the principles he had taught. Aristotle. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and polymath whose work covered a vast range of subjects, including natural sciences, philosophy, linguistics, economics, politics, psychology, and the arts. He founded the peripatetic school of philosophy at the Lyceum in Athens, establishing the Aristotelian tradition that would lay the foundation for modern scientific and philosophical thought. Little is known about his early life. He was born in Stagira, a city in northern Greece, during the classical period. His father, Nicomachus, died when Aristotle was still a child, and he was raised by a guardian. At the age of 18, he moved to Athens and joined Plato's academy, where he studied for nearly 20 years. After Plato's death, he left Athens and was later invited by Philip II of Macedon to tutor his son, Alexander the Great, beginning in 343 BCE. During this time, he developed many of the ideas that would shape his later works. In 343 BCE, King Philip II of Macedon invited Aristotle to tutor his son, Alexander the Great. Aristotle taught him various subjects, including politics and literature, and is said to have gifted him an annotated copy of the Iliad. After a few years, Alexander took on his own leadership role, and Aristotle returned to Athens, where he established his own school, the Lyceum. Over the next 12 years, he taught, conducted research, and compiled a vast library. His major works, including Nicomachean ethics, politics, metaphysics, and poetics, shaped Western thought for centuries. Despite his early influence on Alexander, their relationship later became strained due to differing political views. After Alexander's death in 323 BCE, anti-Macedonian sentiment grew in Athens, and Aristotle was accused of impiety. To avoid persecution, he fled to Chalcis, where he died later that year. His writings, preserved by his student Theophrastus, continued to circulate and influence intellectual traditions in philosophy, science, and logic for centuries. Aristotle later returned to Athens, where he founded the Lyceum and established a library that allowed him to compile and organize a vast amount of knowledge. He wrote extensively, producing hundreds of works, though only about a third of them have survived. Unlike many philosophers before him, Aristotle developed a systematic approach to studying various disciplines, synthesizing existing knowledge into a structured framework. His influence extended far beyond his own time, shaping intellectual traditions for centuries. His impact on medieval scholarship was profound. His contributions to science remained dominant from antiquity through the Middle Ages and into the Renaissance, only gradually being replaced with new theories during the Enlightenment. His ideas influenced Judeo-Islamic philosophy, early Christian thought, and Catholic scholasticism, particularly through figures like Thomas Aquinas. Medieval Muslim scholars referred to him as the first teacher, while Christian philosophers simply called him the philosopher. The poet Dante recognized his intellectual authority, describing him as the master of those who know. Aristotle is often considered one of the earliest scientists. His work laid the groundwork for formal logic, and his writings on the subject were studied by medieval scholars such as Peter Abelard and Jean Buridan. His influence on logical reasoning persisted well into the 19th century. His ethical theories, which have always been widely respected, continue to be central to modern discussions on virtue ethics. Across centuries, his work has remained a cornerstone of philosophical inquiry and intellectual thought. Few individuals have shaped Western thought as profoundly as Aristotle, particularly in the realm of ethics. His work, Nicomachean Ethics, presents a comprehensive view of his moral philosophy and introduces the idea of the golden mean. This concept is straightforward in theory, but challenging in practice. The golden mean emphasizes that a virtuous life is achieved by maintaining balance, avoiding both excess and deficiency in character traits. It promotes moderation in emotions and behavior, advocating for a well-balanced approach to life. For Aristotle, ethical living is closely tied to the pursuit of eudaimonia, a term often translated as happiness, but more accurately meaning human flourishing. He considered this the highest good and the ultimate goal of life. Unlike temporary pleasure or fleeting emotions, eudaimonia is a lasting state that results from consistently practicing virtue. Aristotle believed that virtues are not innate, but must be developed through practice and habit. He divided them into two categories: intellectual virtues, which are cultivated through education and learning, and moral virtues, which are strengthened through repeated actions. The golden mean applies primarily to moral virtues, but can also be extended to intellectual ones. According to Aristotle, every virtue exists between two extremes, one of excess and the other of deficiency. For example, courage is the balance between recklessness, which is too much bravery, and cowardice, which is too little. Similarly, generosity is the middle ground between being wasteful and being overly frugal. The golden mean is not about rigidly following a single rule, but about understanding that the right balance depends on context and individual circumstances. A key aspect of the golden mean is that it is not the same for everyone or every situation. What is considered a balanced response in one scenario may be excessive or insufficient in another. This highlights the importance of wisdom and discernment in determining the right course of action. Aristotle's ethical framework teaches that living virtuously requires continuous self-awareness and thoughtful decision-making to achieve true fulfillment. Aristotle also had a strong interest in psychology. His exploration of psychology covered the nature of the soul, memory, perception, and dreams. His ideas, particularly from On the Soul, shaped early understandings of human cognition and behavior. Unlike many of his predecessors, he approached these topics through systematic observation and reasoning, rather than attributing them to supernatural forces. His theories focused on how the mind processes experiences, stores information, and interprets reality. Aristotle classified living beings based on their soul's function, dividing them into three types. The vegetative soul, found in plants, is responsible for growth, reproduction, and nourishment. The sensitive soul, present in animals, allows for movement, sensation, and perception. The rational soul, unique to humans, grants the ability to think, reason, and form abstract concepts. This classification positioned humans as distinct from other living beings due to their capacity for intellectual thought. He argued that the soul was the defining form of a living being, meaning it could not exist independently from the body. This idea opposed Plato's belief in the soul's ability to separate from the body and undergo reincarnation. Aristotle rejected the notion that a soul could be mismatched with a body or transferred to another, asserting that the soul and body were intrinsically linked. Unlike many thinkers of his time, Aristotle placed the seat of intelligence and reasoning in the heart, rather than the brain. He believed that the heart was the source of life and movement, as it was central to the body's function. The brain, he argued, served only to cool the blood, rather than being responsible for thought. His view was influenced by his focus on the body's observable functions rather than abstract theories. In his study of memory, Aristotle distinguished between the ability to store experiences and the act of recalling them. Memory, according to him, is the retention of past experiences in the form of impressions. These impressions, which he believed were imprinted on a semi-fluid organ, likely the heart, allowed individuals to recall events from the past. He argued that memory differs from perception because it involves recognizing that an event has already happened, whereas perception deals with immediate sensory experiences. For example, a person seeing a tree for the first time perceives it, but remembering the tree later requires accessing stored impressions. Aristotle also differentiated between remembering and recollection. Remembering happens naturally as past impressions resurface without effort, while recollection is a deliberate process in which a person searches for a specific memory. He described recollection as a chain reaction, where one thought leads to another until the correct memory is retrieved. He identified three principles that influence this process: similarity, contrast, and contiguity. Similarity occurs when one memory triggers another with shared characteristics. Contrast happens when an experience is recalled because it is the opposite of another, such as remembering darkness when thinking of light. Contiguity refers to the association of memories based on their proximity in time or space, such as recalling events that happened in the same location. Aristotle believed that only humans could recall intellectual concepts such as numbers and words, while animals could remember past experiences based on sensory perception. Animals with a sense of time could recognize patterns in their experiences, but lacked the ability to reflect on them intellectually. He argued that memory played a crucial role in learning and decision-making, as individuals rely on past experiences to navigate the present and anticipate the future. His study of sleep and dreams further explored how the mind processes experiences. He defined sleep as a necessary function for physical and mental recovery, often caused by sensory exhaustion or digestion. During sleep, the body rests, and the mind temporarily loses its ability to actively perceive, think critically, or make decisions. However, Aristotle believed that the senses remained partially active, allowing for the formation of dreams. According to Aristotle, dreams result from lingering impressions of past experiences. While awake, people are constantly exposed to new stimuli, which override previous sensory impressions. During sleep, when external distractions are absent, these past impressions resurface, creating dream images. He compared dreaming to the way an emotionally overwhelmed person misinterprets reality. Just as someone deeply in love may think they see their beloved everywhere, the sleeping mind is more suggestible and easily deceived by dream images. Because of this, people often believe their dreams are real, even when they are absurd. Aristotle rejected the idea that dreams were divine messages or predictions of the future, a common belief in ancient times. He argued that when dreams seemed to resemble real-life events, it was due to coincidence rather than supernatural foresight. He also defined the criteria for what qualifies as a dream. First, a dream must occur while a person is fully asleep. If an image appears upon waking or in a dark room, it is not a dream, but a waking perception. Second, a dream must be based on past impressions rather than new sensory stimuli. If a loud noise occurs during sleep and a person dreams of a door slamming, the noise itself is not part of the dream, but rather an external influence. Aristotle's approach to psychology emphasized natural explanations over mystical interpretations. His theories on the soul, memory, and dreams formed the foundation for later discussions on cognition, influencing both philosophy and early scientific thought. His emphasis on observation and logical reasoning paved the way for future studies of human behavior, perception, and the workings of the mind. Aristotle was also interested in rhetoric and the art of persuasion, boiling it down to three fundamental types of the human psyche you should appeal to: ethos, pathos, and logos. Ethos focuses on the credibility and character of the speaker, emphasizing trustworthiness and authority. Pathos appeals to the emotions of the audience, aiming to create feelings that influence their judgment. Logos relies on logical reasoning, using evidence and structured arguments to persuade. He also divides rhetoric into three main categories based on purpose. Epideictic rhetoric is used in ceremonial speeches that express praise or criticism, often seen in eulogies or speeches honoring achievements. Forensic rhetoric is used in judicial settings, where arguments determine guilt or innocence in legal cases. Deliberative rhetoric focuses on decision-making, urging an audience to take action or adopt a particular policy, commonly used in political or legislative debates. In constructing persuasive arguments, Aristotle identifies two primary methods of proof. The first is the enthymeme, which is a form of reasoning that relies on a logical structure, often leaving out a premise that the audience can infer. The second is the paradigma, which persuades by using examples, either historical cases or hypothetical scenarios, to illustrate a point. Aristotle's approach to rhetoric remains influential, providing a foundation for public speaking, debate, and communication strategies even today. Zeno of Citium. Zeno of Citium was a philosopher from Cyprus who founded the Stoic school of philosophy in Athens around 300 BCE. His teachings emphasized living a virtuous life in harmony with nature, drawing inspiration from the Cynics, but with a greater focus on self-discipline and rationality. Stoicism became one of the most influential philosophical movements of the Hellenistic and Roman periods, and later experienced revivals during the Renaissance and in modern times. Zeno was born around 334 BCE in Citium, a city that had both Greek and Phoenician influences. His ancestry is debated, but he received a Greek education and wrote exclusively in Greek. His father, Menasseus, was a merchant, and Zeno followed in his footsteps, becoming a wealthy trader. His life changed after a shipwreck left him stranded in Athens. While visiting a bookseller, he encountered Xenophon's Memorabilia, a work about Socrates. Impressed by the portrayal of Socrates, he asked where he could find such a man, and at that moment, the Cynic philosopher Crates of Thebes passed by. The bookseller pointed to him, leading Zeno to become his student. Despite his wealth, Zeno adopted a simple, ascetic lifestyle influenced by the Cynics. He admired their emphasis on self-sufficiency, but was uncomfortable with their extreme disregard for social norms. Crates attempted to toughen Zeno's resolve by giving him a pot of lentil soup to carry through a crowded marketplace. When Zeno tried to hide it, Crates deliberately smashed the pot, causing the soup to spill down Zeno's legs. Embarrassed, Zeno tried to flee, but Crates scolded him, saying there was nothing shameful in the situation. While Zeno respected Cynic values, he retained a sense of decorum, which later influenced the Stoic emphasis on virtue, without rejecting societal customs entirely. In addition to studying under Crates, Zeno learned from philosophers of the Megarian school, including Stilpo and Diodorus Cronus, and was influenced by Platonists such as Xenocrates and Polemo. His philosophical outlook blended aspects of these teachings with his own ideas, forming the foundation of Stoicism. Around 301 BCE, he began teaching in the Stoa Poikile, a colonnade in Athens' marketplace. His followers were initially called Zenonians, but later became known as Stoics, named after the location where he taught. Zeno gained the admiration of notable figures, including King Antigonus II Gonatas of Macedonia, who frequently visited him in Athens. The king invited Zeno to his court, but Zeno declined, instead sending his student Perseus in his place. Among Zeno's other students were Aristo of Chios, Sphaerus, and Cleanthes, who later became the head of the Stoic school. Despite his growing influence, Zeno remained committed to Athens and was offered Athenian citizenship, which he declined out of loyalty to his homeland. In Citium, he was highly regarded and contributed to the restoration of public baths, earning recognition as Zeno the philosopher. Known for his serious and reserved nature, he preferred quiet discussions over elaborate speeches and was deeply focused on philosophical inquiry. Though Diogenes Laertius preserved many witty remarks attributed to Zeno, these anecdotes are often considered unreliable. Zeno's Stoicism emphasized rationality, self-control, and accepting life's challenges with resilience. His school of thought continued under his student Cleanthes and later flourished under Chrysippus, ultimately shaping ethical and philosophical ideas that endured for centuries. Zeno divided philosophy into three main areas: logic, physics, and ethics. Logic encompassed a broad range of topics, including rhetoric, grammar, and theories of perception and thought. Physics was not just the study of nature, but also the divine structure of the universe. Ethics, which Zeno saw as the ultimate purpose of philosophy, focused on achieving a fulfilled and virtuous life by living in harmony with nature. Because his ideas were later developed by philosophers like Chrysippus, it can be difficult to determine exactly what Zeno himself believed, but his core principles can still be outlined. In logic, Zeno was influenced by Stilpo and the Megarian school. He believed that a wise person must develop a strong foundation in logic to avoid being misled by false reasoning. Cicero criticized Zeno for being less precise in his treatment of logic compared to earlier philosophers, and it was his successors, particularly Chrysippus, who refined Stoic logic into a more structured system. Zeno distinguished between concepts that could be clearly understood and those that were incomprehensible, emphasizing the role of free will in judging and accepting sensory impressions. He illustrated the process of gaining true knowledge with a simple demonstration using his hand. When he stretched out his fingers, he compared this to perception, the first stage of understanding. Slightly closing his fingers represented assent, the willingness to accept an idea as true. Making a fist symbolized comprehension, a deeper level of understanding. Finally, gripping the fist tightly with his other hand represented absolute knowledge, which he believed only a wise person could attain. Zeno's view of the universe was deeply influenced by Heraclitus and was based on pantheism, the idea that the universe itself is divine. He saw the cosmos as a rational and interconnected whole, where every part contributed to the functioning of the entire system. At the heart of this system was a creative and intelligent force, which he described as an artistically working fire. This fire acted as a guiding principle, shaping and directing everything in existence. According to Zeno, nature operates with intention and precision, much like an artist creating a masterpiece. The fire spreads throughout the universe, shaping and maintaining everything, similar to how human hands shape objects in craftsmanship. Zeno believed that this divine fire, or ether, was responsible for all activity in the universe. Matter itself, he argued, was passive, and it was only through the influence of fire that movement, change, and creation were possible. He described a cycle in which fire transforms into air, then into water, and finally into earth. The process then reverses, with the elements eventually returning to fire. This constant cycle of transformation kept the universe in balance. He also believed that individual souls were made of the same divine fire as the universal soul, meaning that humans were directly connected to the rational structure of the cosmos. Following Heraclitus, Zeno held that the universe went through continuous cycles of creation and destruction. He believed that the universe naturally directed everything toward what was right and prevented wrongdoing. He also identified this cosmic order with fate, seeing it as an unstoppable force that determined all events. However, within this framework, he still allowed for free will, arguing that people could choose how they responded to the course of fate. True happiness, he believed, could only be achieved by accepting and aligning oneself with the natural order of the universe. By following nature's laws and accepting life's challenges with wisdom and self-discipline, a person could attain inner peace and fulfillment. Zeno believed that the ultimate goal in life was to attain happiness, which he described as living in harmony with reason and the natural order of the universe. He shared the Cynic view that there is only one true good worth pursuing: virtue. According to him, happiness could only be achieved through reason, which aligns with the universal rational principle that governs everything. He defined negative emotions, or disturbances of the mind, as feelings that go against reason and nature. Virtue, the source of morally good actions, was the only true good. Unlike the Cynics, who rejected all external values, Zeno acknowledged that some things, while morally neutral, could still have practical value. He introduced the idea that certain things are preferable based on their role in self-preservation. However, he maintained that while these things could be useful, they were not necessary for happiness, which depended solely on moral actions. He emphasized the importance of fitting actions, a term he introduced to describe behaviors that align with reason and virtue. Zeno argued that virtue and vice are absolute opposites and cannot coexist. He rejected the idea that one virtuous act could be greater than another. All moral actions were equally good, just as all immoral actions were equally bad. Because people act based on free will, even passive emotional states that are not guided by reason were considered immoral, as they could lead to irrational actions. He classified emotions into 4 negative types: desire, fear, pleasure, and sorrow. In contrast, he identified 3 positive emotions: will, caution, and joy. Notably, he did not recognize a rational counterpart to pain, suggesting that suffering could not be aligned with reason. He believed that all errors in judgment must be completely removed and replaced with rational thought. None of Zeno's original writings have survived except for fragments quoted by later writers. His most well-known work was The Republic, written either as an imitation of or response to Plato's work of the same name. Although it has been lost, more details about it have been preserved than any of his other writings, giving insight into his vision of an ideal Stoic society. In 1949, a manuscript in Old Armenian was discovered, bearing the title On Nature, a name that matched one of Zeno's lost works. Initially believed to be his writing, it was later determined to have been written by an unknown Christian philosopher from the late 6th century or later. This author, now referred to as Pseudo-Zeno, combined Christian ideas with elements of ancient philosophy, though in a subtle and restrained way. Diogenes. Diogenes was a controversial and unconventional figure in ancient philosophy. He was either exiled or fled from his hometown of Sinope due to a scandal involving the debasement of currency, though it remains unclear whether he or his father, a banker named Hysias, was responsible. After leaving Sinope, he traveled to Athens, where he openly criticized societal norms and challenged conventional values. He became associated with the Cynic philosophy, which emphasized living in harmony with nature, rejecting materialism, and embracing self-sufficiency. He followed the teachings of Antisthenes, though their relationship was strained at first, with Antisthenes reportedly trying to drive him away. Undeterred, Diogenes insisted on learning from him and ultimately surpassed his mentor in both reputation and the extreme simplicity of his lifestyle. Diogenes embraced a life of asceticism and self-discipline, rejecting material wealth and social conventions. He was known for sleeping in public spaces, often in a large ceramic jar in the marketplace, and begging for food. He viewed human customs and institutions as corrupt and artificial, using his actions to challenge social expectations. His sharp wit and fearless defiance of authority made him notorious. He famously carried a lantern during the daytime, claiming to be searching for an honest man, which was his way of mocking what he saw as the dishonesty and hypocrisy of society. Despite his rejection of traditional values, Diogenes gained the attention of powerful figures, including Alexander the Great. When Alexander met him in Corinth and offered to grant him any request, Diogenes simply asked him to move aside because he was blocking his sunlight. This interaction highlighted his disdain for power and his belief that true happiness came from independence rather than wealth or influence. His journey to Athens was marked by hardships, including the loss of his slave Manes, who escaped from him. Rather than lamenting his loss, Diogenes dismissed it with humor, remarking that if his slave could live without him, he too could manage without a servant. This attitude reflected his belief in self-reliance and his rejection of social hierarchies. He also ridiculed the idea of ownership and dependency, seeing them as obstacles to true freedom. Diogenes viewed philosophy as a way of life rather than an abstract pursuit. He believed that virtue was best demonstrated through action rather than theory, and modeled himself on the hero Heraclitus, who embodied strength, endurance, and self-sufficiency. His teachings influenced later philosophers, including Crates, who passed on Cynic ideas to Zeno of Citium, the founder of Stoicism. Although none of his writings have survived, Diogenes' life and ideas were preserved through anecdotes recorded by later philosophers, particularly Diogenes Laertius. He remains one of the most well-known cynics, remembered for his sharp wit, fearless defiance of convention, and commitment to living a life of radical simplicity. His legacy continues to influence philosophical discussions on materialism, freedom, and authenticity. Diogenes was known for his extreme lifestyle and rejection of social conventions. He lived in a large clay jar near the temple of Cybele, enduring all types of weather. One day, after seeing a boy drink water using only his hands, he discarded his wooden bowl, exclaiming that he had been carrying unnecessary baggage. Unlike the Athenians, who followed strict social customs, he ate in the marketplace whenever he was hungry. When criticized for this, he simply pointed out that hunger did not wait for proper settings. One of his most famous acts was walking around Athens in broad daylight with a lamp. When asked what he was doing, he replied that he was looking for a man. While modern versions of the story claim he was searching for an honest man, ancient sources simply state that he was looking for a real person. This was likely his way of criticizing society, suggesting that people around him were dishonest and lacked true character. Diogenes taught through action rather than traditional lectures. He believed that true wisdom and happiness belonged to those who lived independently from society and its artificial rules. He rejected not only material wealth and social structures, but also traditional views of decency. His behavior often shocked people. He urinated on those who insulted him, defecated in the theater, and masturbated in public, once commenting that he wished hunger could be satisfied as easily as other bodily needs. He also mocked people openly, using his middle finger in a way that was considered highly offensive at the time. His disdain for abstract philosophy led him to openly challenge Plato, whom he saw as overly concerned with theoretical ideas. When Plato famously defined a human as a featherless biped, Diogenes plucked a chicken, brought it to Plato's academy, and declared, "Here is Plato's man." This forced the academy to refine its definition by adding, "with broad, flat nails." Diogenes followed the teachings of Antisthenes and admired Socrates, but took their ideas to extreme levels. Like Socrates, he believed in challenging people's beliefs to improve them morally, but unlike Socrates, he held little hope for their ability to change. Plato once described Diogenes as a Socrates gone mad, reflecting both his brilliance and his disregard for conventional wisdom. Diogenes was once captured by pirates while traveling to Aegina and was sold as a slave in Crete. When asked about his trade, he responded that he was skilled in governing men and should be sold to someone in need of a master. A Corinthian named Zeniades was impressed by his confidence and purchased him, assigning him the task of educating his 2 sons. Some accounts suggest that Diogenes was freed quickly, while others claim he remained in Xeniades' household for the rest of his life, becoming a valued member of the family. He spent his time teaching self-discipline and virtue, even delivering lectures at the Isthmian Games. Though most stories describe him living in a jar in Athens, some accounts suggest he also lived in one near a gymnasium in Corinth. It was in Corinth that he reportedly met Alexander the Great. While Diogenes was basking in the morning sunlight, Alexander approached him, excited to meet the famous philosopher. He offered to grant him any favor, to which Diogenes replied, "Yes, stand out of my sunlight." Alexander, amused and impressed, is said to have remarked, "If I were not Alexander, I would wish to be Diogenes." In another version of their meeting, Alexander found Diogenes examining a pile of human bones. When asked what he was doing, Diogenes responded, "I am searching for the bones of your father, but I cannot distinguish them from those of a slave." There are conflicting reports about his death. Some claim he held his breath until he died, while others say he became ill from eating raw octopus or suffered from an infected dog bite. When asked about his burial wishes, he instructed that his body be thrown outside the city walls to be consumed by wild animals. When people expressed concern, he mockingly requested a stick to chase the animals away. When reminded that he would not be aware of what happened after death, he replied, "If I lack awareness, then why should I care?" Even in his final moments, he continued to challenge societal customs and expose their absurdities. To honor his memory, the Corinthians erected a pillar with a statue of a dog, a fitting tribute to the man who had lived like one. Some sources claim that Diogenes and Alexander died on the same day, though the exact date of his death remains uncertain. Diogenes, along with Antisthenes and Crates of Thebes, is regarded as one of the key figures in the development of Cynicism. Since Cynic philosophy is deeply connected to action rather than theory, much of what is known about Diogenes comes from stories about his life and the sayings attributed to him rather than from written works. While he reportedly authored over 10 books and 7 tragedies, none of these have survived, except for 51 letters that are considered later fabrications. Diogenes became closely associated with dogs, both in behavior and in the values he admired. It is unclear whether others first called him doggish as an insult, which he then embraced, or if he initiated the comparison himself. When asked why people called him a dog, he replied, "I fawn on those who give me anything, I yelp at those who refuse, and I set my teeth in scoundrels." The association with dogs was later embraced by other cynics. The name Cynic itself may have come from the Cynosarges Gymnasium in Athens, where Antisthenes taught, meaning the place of the white dog. Ancient sources give several explanations for why the Cynics were likened to dogs. They lived with complete disregard for social conventions, eating, sleeping, and even engaging in personal activities in public. Their shamelessness was not out of disrespect, but as a challenge to unnecessary societal rules. They saw themselves as guardians of their philosophy, barking at those who corrupted truth. Like dogs, they could discern friend from foe, welcoming those open to wisdom and rejecting those they saw as hypocrites. For Diogenes, people lived hypocritically, complicating their lives with unnecessary customs. He believed they could learn much from dogs, who live simply, free from vanity, eating whatever is available, sleeping wherever they please, and making no unnecessary distinctions between rich or poor, powerful or weak. He once said, "Other dogs bite their enemies. I bite my friends to save them," reflecting his belief that criticism could lead to improvement. Diogenes rejected material wealth, artificial status, and social conventions, advocating for a return to a simple, natural life. His extreme austerity made a strong impression, and later, Stoics considered him a model of wisdom. He often criticized how humans misused the simple gifts of nature, remarking, "Humans have complicated every simple gift of the gods." One of his most famous declarations was that he was a citizen of the world when asked where he came from. While Socrates had made similar statements about belonging to the world, rather than a single city, Diogenes was the first to use the word cosmopolitan. In a time when identity was tied to one's city-state, this was a radical idea. As an exile and an outsider, he rejected the idea that a person's worth should be defined by birthplace or social status, instead promoting the idea that human beings should see themselves as part of a broader, shared existence. Heraclitus. Heraclitus was a pre-Socratic philosopher from the city of Ephesus, which was then part of the Persian Empire. His ideas have influenced both ancient and modern philosophy, with thinkers such as Plato, Aristotle, Hegel, and Heidegger drawing from his work. However, much of what is known about him comes from fragments of his writings and later interpretations, as his only recorded work has largely been lost. Heraclitus was known for his cryptic and paradoxical style of writing, earning him the titles the Dark and the Obscure. He was often seen as a solitary and melancholic figure, earning him the nickname the Weeping Philosopher, in contrast to Democritus, who was called the Laughing Philosopher. His philosophy revolved around two main ideas: the unity of opposites and the concept of change. He argued that everything in the world is in a constant state of flux, famously stating, "No man ever steps in the same river twice." He saw harmony and justice in conflict, and believed that the world was always in a state of becoming, rather than being fixed and unchanging. Heraclitus identified fire as the fundamental substance of the universe, continuing a tradition among early Greek thinkers who proposed different elements as the primary source of existence, such as Thales with water and Anaximenes with air. He also introduced the concept of the logos, which he saw as a guiding principle that structured the universe. Born into an aristocratic family in Ephesus, Heraclitus is believed to have renounced his hereditary claim to power in favor of a life dedicated to philosophy. He was critical of the democratic tendencies of his time and had little faith in the common people. While some sources suggest he was an elitist who favored the wealthy, others compare him to figures like Solon, who distanced themselves from political factions. Heraclitus rejected traditional religious practices, criticizing mystery cults, blood sacrifices, and idol worship. He was equally dismissive of funeral rites, claiming that corpses were no more valuable than dung. He also attacked prominent figures such as Homer, Hesiod, Pythagoras, and Xenophanes, while praising Bias of Priene for his cynical view of human nature. Most sources place Heraclitus's peak influence around 504 to 501 BC during the reign of Darius the Great. This timeline is based on his references to earlier philosophers like Pythagoras and Xenophanes. According to later accounts, he suffered from dropsy and attempted to cure himself by covering his body in dung, leading to his death. Some scholars believe this story was intended as a parody of his own philosophical views on the nature of the soul and transformation. Heraclitus is believed to have written a single book on papyrus, though its title remains unknown. While over 100 fragments of his work have survived through quotations by later authors, the original text itself has been lost. Some ancient sources suggest that Heraclitus dedicated his book to the Artemision, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Scholars such as Charles Kahn believe that his work was available to readers for centuries, but by the time of the 6th century philosopher Simplicius, it had become so rare that even scholars in Athens could not access it. Heraclitus's philosophy is centered on the concepts of change and the unity of opposites. Aristotle described him as a thinker who rejected the principle of non-contradiction, suggesting that Heraclitus believed something could be both true and false at the same time. Aristotle also classified Heraclitus as a materialist, arguing that he viewed the universe as being in a constant state of transformation. Unlike Plato and Aristotle, who believed in unchanging forms, Heraclitus saw the material world as ever-changing. Some scholars interpret his ideas as suggesting that stability and flux are simply different aspects of reality. Many of Heraclitus's surviving fragments reflect his belief in the unity of opposites. He argued that things that seem to be in conflict are actually connected. For example, he described a fuller's comb, which has both straight and curved paths, as a single entity. He also stated that the way up and the way down are the same, and that a circle's beginning and end are indistinguishable. He believed that contradictions were not separate forces, but instead part of a greater unity, saying that everything arises from one and returns to one. According to Heraclitus, opposites are constantly shifting into one another. He believed that mortals and immortals exchange roles through life and death, and that what is alive today will eventually die, just as what is dead will give way to new life. Similarly, he argued that cold things become warm, hot things cool down, wet becomes dry, and dry becomes wet. This idea extended to human experience, where struggle and hardship make pleasure and rest meaningful. Heraclitus also suggested that perspective shapes how one experiences reality. What is desirable to one being may be repulsive to another. While humans drink fresh water and wash in it, fish thrive in salt water. Pigs prefer mud for bathing, while birds use dust. Oxen enjoy eating bitter vetches, and donkeys would rather eat garbage than gold. These observations reinforced his idea that opposites are not absolute, but dependent on context and perspective. Diogenes Laertius summarized Heraclitus's philosophy by stating that all things come into existence through the conflict of opposites, and that everything is in constant motion, like a flowing stream. The phrase, "everything flows," is widely associated with Heraclitus, though scholars debate whether he ever stated it explicitly. A similar expression, "everything moves," was attributed to him by Plato in the Cratylus dialogue. Heraclitus's ideas on change are often illustrated through the metaphor of a river. Different versions of this concept survive in ancient texts. One version states that those who step into the same river encounter different waters flowing through it. Another asserts that a person both steps and does not step into the same river, and both is and is not. A third states simply that it is impossible to step into the same river twice. These variations suggest not only that the river is always changing, but that people also change over time. Some scholars argue that Heraclitus was not just emphasizing the idea of flux, but also pointing to underlying stability. The identity of the river remains despite the continuous movement of water, just as existence itself maintains order despite constant transformation. Another core aspect of Heraclitus's philosophy is the belief that conflict and opposition are necessary for justice and harmony. He viewed strife, which he called eris, as essential to the balance of the universe. He contrasted this with Anaximander, who saw the conflict of opposites as a form of injustice. Heraclitus argued that harmony arises from opposing forces, much like the tension of a bowstring or the contrast between high and low notes in music. Aristotle later noted that Heraclitus opposed Homer's wish to rid the world of strife, believing that without it, there would be no natural order, no harmony in music, no balance between male and female, and no stability in the world. Heraclitus used wordplay to express these ideas, famously stating that the bow's name is life, but its work is death, illustrating the coexistence of opposites. He also observed that substances require movement to maintain their form, comparing it to a drink that separates if it is not stirred. He extended this idea to the concept of war, describing it as the driving force behind creation. He called war the father and king of all, suggesting that it determines the fate of gods and men, shaping society by distinguishing between rulers and the ruled. He noted that gods and humans honor those who die in war, reinforcing his belief that struggle is fundamental to existence. A key idea in Heraclitus's philosophy is the concept of logos, a term that traditionally means word, speech, or reason. For Heraclitus, logos represents the rational order underlying the universe. He emphasized that true wisdom comes from understanding this universal structure, rather than relying on personal opinions. One of his fragments suggests that people should listen not to him, but to the logos, acknowledging that everything is interconnected. Another states that most people fail to recognize or express the truth found in logos. Scholars have debated what Heraclitus meant by logos. Some believe he used the term in multiple ways throughout his writings, while others argue that he used it in a common, straightforward sense, as his contemporaries did. Some interpretations suggest that logos represents a set of rational principles governing nature, while others propose that it refers to truth itself, or even to his written work. One scholar translated logos simply as sense, reinforcing the idea that Heraclitus was describing an underlying logic to existence. The idea of logos in Heraclitus's philosophy may have influenced later ideas about natural law. He believed that human laws should be defended as strongly as city walls, since all human laws derive their authority from a higher, divine law. Unlike the sophists, who argued that human laws were artificial and could be replaced by natural ones, Heraclitus maintained that human laws are an extension of nature's laws. While Heraclitus is considered one of the early Greek cosmologists, he showed little interest in astronomy, meteorology, or mathematics compared to earlier thinkers. Some scholars suggest he believed the earth was flat and extended infinitely in all directions. His perspective on time and fate was similarly abstract. He suggested that everything happens according to destiny, stating that time is a child playing a game of drafts, holding kingly power. This enigmatic statement has led to various interpretations. Some believe it implies that life follows structured rules like a game. Others think it suggests that conflict governs existence, while some interpret it as indicating that life is shaped by random or divine whims, much like the unpredictable play of a child. Heraclitus viewed the sun as a constantly renewing entity, stating that the sun is new each day. He also believed that the sun never truly sets, an idea likely inspired by his reflections on how the sun appears to move across the sky. According to the physician Galen, Heraclitus described the sun as a burning mass that ignites at dawn and extinguishes at dusk. He also maintained that the sun is as large as it appears to the human eye, rather than being a distant and immense body. Additionally, he suggested that the sun follows a natural order, and, if it exceeds its limits, the forces of justice will restore balance. Heraclitus had an unconventional view of the moon as well, believing that it and the sun were fire-filled bowls. He explained the phases of the moon by suggesting that its bowl rotated, altering how much fire was visible. One of his surviving fragments discusses the moon's appearance near the end of its cycle, providing insight into early Greek astronomical thought. When speaking about divine forces, Heraclitus stated that the thunderbolt steers all things, possibly linking Zeus to a guiding cosmic force. However, he also expressed a complex view of divinity, stating that the one wise being would and would not be called by the name of Zeus. He presented a relativistic perspective on the gods, comparing their view of humanity to the way humans perceive children or animals. He suggested that while humans categorize actions as just or unjust, from a divine standpoint, everything is balanced and part of a greater order. A well-known anecdote describes Heraclitus sitting near a kitchen fire when visitors hesitated to approach him. He assured them not to be afraid, as divinity is present even in humble places. This story reflects his belief that all aspects of existence reveal natural beauty and meaning. One of Heraclitus's most famous statements is that a man's character is his fate. He suggested that one's inner nature determines the course of their life, with destiny being shaped by personal choices and temperament. He saw the soul as something vast and complex, stating that its limits could never be fully discovered. He viewed the soul as a combination of fire and water, with fire representing its noble aspect and water its weaker side. He emphasized the importance of self-control, arguing that indulgence weakens the soul's fire, while excessive emotions, like anger, could lead to self-destruction. Heraclitus associated being awake with understanding and suggested that sleep disconnects a person from knowledge. According to Sextus Empiricus, Heraclitus believed that people draw in divine reason through breathing, losing awareness during sleep, but regaining it when they wake. He suggested that perception would change if reality itself transformed, stating that if everything became smoke, perception would occur through the nostrils. Using a metaphor, he compared the soul to a spider and the body to its web, suggesting that the soul is the unifying force of a person. Unlike Homer, who depicted souls in the afterlife as mere shadows, Heraclitus dismissed this idea, saying that souls smell in Hades. He hinted that the afterlife might be more surprising than people expect, though his exact beliefs remain uncertain. The Aristotelian tradition played a significant role in preserving Heraclitus's ideas about the soul. Aristotle noted that Heraclitus saw the soul as a warm exhalation in constant motion, making it the fundamental force behind all existence. Archimedes. Archimedes was born around 287 BC in the city of Syracuse, a Greek settlement in Sicily. His birth date is estimated based on a statement by the Byzantine scholar John Tzetzes, who claimed that Archimedes lived for 75 years before his death in 250–212 BC. Plutarch wrote that Archimedes was connected to King Hiero II, the ruler of Syracuse, though Cicero suggested he came from a more modest background. In his work, The Sand Reckoner, Archimedes identified his father as Phidias, an astronomer about whom little else is known. A biography of Archimedes was once written by his friend Heraclitus, but it has been lost, leaving many aspects of his life unknown. It is unclear whether he married, had children, or traveled to Alexandria as a young man. However, from his surviving works, it is evident that he maintained scholarly relationships with Alexandrian intellectuals, including Conon of Samos and Eratosthenes of Cyrene, who was the head librarian at the Library of Alexandria. Most of what is known about Archimedes comes from later Greek and Roman historians who wrote about him long after his death. The earliest known reference appears in Histories by Polybius, written roughly 70 years after Archimedes' death. This account does not provide much insight into his personal life, but describes his role in developing war machines to defend Syracuse from the Romans. During the Second Punic War, the city changed its allegiance from Rome to Carthage, prompting a Roman military campaign led by Marcus Claudius Marcellus and Appius Claudius Pulcher. Archimedes designed a variety of defensive machines, including enhanced catapults, large stone throwers, and devices capable of lifting and damaging enemy ships. Although the Romans eventually captured Syracuse, they suffered heavy losses due to Archimedes' engineering ingenuity. Cicero, writing in the 1st century BC, mentioned Archimedes in several works. While serving as a quaestor in Sicily, he discovered what was believed to be Archimedes' neglected tomb near the Agrigentine Gate in Syracuse. After clearing away the overgrown vegetation, Cicero identified a carving on the tomb illustrating Archimedes' mathematical proof that the volume and surface area of a sphere are 2/3 that of a surrounding cylinder. Cicero also noted that Marcellus had taken 2 of Archimedes' mechanical devices, which functioned as early models of planetariums, back to Rome. The Roman historian Livy later repeated the account of Syracuse's capture and the role Archimedes played in its defense. The circumstances surrounding Archimedes' death have been recorded in different ways. Plutarch provided 2 accounts of how he was killed after the Romans took Syracuse. The most widely accepted story describes Archimedes studying a mathematical problem when a Roman soldier ordered him to meet with Marcellus. Absorbed in his work, Archimedes refused, which enraged the soldier, leading him to strike Archimedes down with a sword. Another version claims that Archimedes was carrying mathematical instruments when a soldier mistook them for valuable items and killed him. Marcellus was reportedly angered by his death, as he had ordered that Archimedes be spared, recognizing his intellectual brilliance. One of the most famous quotes attributed to Archimedes is, "Do not disturb my circles," supposedly spoken as he was working on a mathematical drawing when confronted by the soldier. However, there is no definitive evidence that he actually said these words, as they do not appear in Plutarch's account. A similar phrase is recorded in Memorable Doings and Sayings by Valerius Maximus, written in the early 1st century AD, where Archimedes is described as shielding a dusty diagram with his hands and pleading for it not to be disturbed. Archimedes is best known for his discovery of a method to determine the volume of an irregular object. According to Vitruvius, King Hiero II of Syracuse commissioned a crown made of pure gold and wanted to verify if the goldsmith had replaced some of it with silver. Archimedes could not melt the crown to measure its density, so he sought another solution. While taking a bath, he noticed that the water level rose as he submerged his body and realized that the volume of displaced water was equal to the volume of the submerged object. Excited by this discovery, he reportedly ran through the streets naked, shouting, "Eureka!" meaning, "I have found it." By comparing the mass of the crown to the volume of displaced water, he could determine its density. If the crown contained silver, its density would be lower than pure gold. Although this story is famous, there is no evidence it appears in Archimedes' original writings. The method described would require extreme precision in measuring water displacement, making its practicality doubtful. Instead, Archimedes may have applied the principle that now bears his name, stating that a body submerged in a fluid experiences a buoyant force equal to the weight of the displaced fluid. He could have compared the crown's density to that of pure gold by balancing it on a scale with a reference gold sample of the same weight, then immersing both in water. The difference in buoyant force would indicate the presence of other metals. Galileo Galilei, who later designed a hydrostatic balance inspired by Archimedes' work, believed this method was likely what Archimedes used. Archimedes did not invent the lever, but provided a mathematical explanation of its function in his work on the equilibrium of planes. Earlier writings, including works attributed to Euclid and the Peripatetic school, described the lever's principle, but Archimedes gave it a rigorous foundation. Many stories highlight his use of levers and pulleys to move heavy objects. Plutarch recounted how he designed block and tackle pulley systems to allow sailors to lift objects far heavier than they could manage on their own. According to Pappus of Alexandria, Archimedes famously claimed, "Give me a place to stand, and I will move the earth," referring to the immense power of leverage. Some later accounts attribute this boast to his invention of the baroulkos, a type of windlass, rather than the lever. Another of Archimedes' inventions was the screw pump, which he designed to remove water from the hull of a large ship. King Hiero II had commissioned the construction of the Syracusia, one of the largest ships of its time, capable of carrying 600 people and equipped with gardens, a gymnasium, and a temple to Aphrodite. To deal with potential leaks, Archimedes created a device with a screw-shaped blade inside a cylinder, which could lift water efficiently. The Archimedes screw could also transfer water from low-lying areas to irrigation canals, a function still used today for pumping water, grains, and other materials. Some historians believe it was an improvement on an earlier device used to irrigate the hanging gardens of Babylon. In the 19th century, the first steamship with a screw propeller was named SS Archimedes in his honor. Archimedes also developed military technology to defend Syracuse against the Romans. One of his notable inventions was the claw of Archimedes, designed to protect the city from naval attacks. This device functioned like a crane with a large metal grappling hook that could latch onto an enemy ship and lift it out of the water, potentially capsizing it. In 2005, a documentary tested a reconstruction of this weapon and found that it was a feasible design. In addition to the claw, Archimedes is credited with improving the catapult's accuracy and power. He is also believed to have invented an early odometer during the First Punic War. This device consisted of a cart with a gear mechanism that dropped a ball into a container after each mile traveled, allowing for accurate distance measurement. A famous but debated claim is that Archimedes designed a heat ray that could set enemy ships on fire using concentrated sunlight. The story suggests that he arranged mirrors into a parabolic shape to focus sunlight onto approaching ships during the siege of Syracuse. While some ancient sources, including Lucian and Galen, mention this, modern scholars doubt its effectiveness. In the Renaissance, several attempts were made to replicate this effect, mostly with negative results. While polished bronze shields or mirrors could have reflected sunlight, they likely only dazzled or temporarily blinded enemy sailors rather than setting ships ablaze. Some modern solar furnaces, however, have demonstrated that sunlight can be concentrated to achieve high temperatures. Archimedes also made contributions to astronomy. In the Sand Reckoner, he discussed the sizes and distances of the Earth, Sun, and Moon. Without trigonometry or modern tools, he estimated the Sun's apparent diameter using a simple measuring device and provided upper and lower bounds to account for observational errors. His work influenced later astronomers, including Ptolemy, who referenced Archimedes' solstice observations in the Almagest. Cicero, in a fictional dialogue set in 129 BC, described how the Roman general Marcellus took two mechanical devices built by Archimedes back to Rome. These machines displayed the movements of the sun, moon, and planets, functioning as early planetariums. According to the account, one of these devices remained Marcellus's personal possession, while the other was placed in the Temple of Virtue in Rome. These mechanisms, possibly referenced in Archimedes' lost work on sphere-making, demonstrate a deep understanding of celestial mechanics. Some researchers speculate that the famous Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device found in a shipwreck dating to around 100 BC, may have been influenced by Archimedean technology. The complexity of such devices suggests that the ancient Greeks possessed knowledge of differential gearing, a concept once thought to be beyond their technological capabilities. Through his mathematical theories and mechanical inventions, Archimedes left a lasting impact on both science and engineering. His ideas influenced future scholars and continue to be studied today. Archimedes is widely regarded as the greatest mathematician of antiquity, and many historians of science and mathematics consider his contributions unparalleled in his time. Eric Temple Bell noted that if one were to name the three greatest mathematicians in history, Archimedes would always be among them, often alongside Newton and Gauss. Some scholars even argue that, considering the scientific and mathematical knowledge available in his era, Archimedes' achievements stand above all others. Alfred North Whitehead and George F. Simmons pointed out that even as late as the year 1500, European scholars knew less than Archimedes had in 212 BC. They emphasized that his contributions in mathematics and physics exceeded those of all other civilizations combined up until the 17th century. Reveal Netz, a leading expert on Greek mathematics, argued that Archimedes' pioneering work in calculus and the application of mathematics to the physical world laid the foundation for Western science. In his view, modern scientific advancements are essentially extensions of Archimedes' ideas, making him the most important scientist in history. Many great thinkers have admired Archimedes' genius. Leonardo da Vinci spoke of him with deep respect and attributed his invention of the architonere to Archimedes. Galileo Galilei described him as superhuman and considered him a master. Christian Huygens, who consciously followed Archimedes' methods in his early work, believed there was no one comparable to him. Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz stated that anyone who truly understood Archimedes and Apollonius would have less admiration for the achievements of later mathematicians. Gauss, one of the greatest mathematicians of modern times, considered Archimedes a hero alongside Newton. His student, Moritz Cantor, recalled a conversation in which Gauss named only 3 mathematicians who had truly revolutionized the field: Archimedes, Newton, and Eisenstein. The famous inventor Nikola Tesla also regarded Archimedes as his ideal, placing him above artists and other intellectuals. Tesla believed that while artists created works of beauty, inventors like Archimedes produced tangible creations that lived and functioned in the real world. His admiration reflects the lasting impact of Archimedes' work, which continues to influence science, engineering, and mathematics to this day.